Hey there, Heather, hello there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Degrassi video. And based off of the three celebrity deaths that we received in the first 4 days of this week, and of course it's being taped on July 26, 2025, gotta do kind of a Degrassi video based off of the three deaths and how, it all connects and all that. My intentional plan was to basically talk about Bark at the Moon specifically because that was the Ozzy Osbourne thing. Ozzy Osbourne passed away on Tuesday, and then it got to me. It was like, well, Thursday. What about like what impact does Hulk Hogan have on Degrassi? And then I'm thinking to myself, what does Theo Huxtable have, you know, on Degrassi? Malcolm Jamal Warner. Well, I mean, given the fact that the Cosby Show was a big show in the 1980s, as well as Degrassi Junior High and High, I guess you can make it that. But the connections I'm going to make with Malcolm Jamal Warner, aka Theo Huxtable, is the whole thing with a black person with a learning disability. Now, this is not to make fun of liberty and all that. It's just a story of how you overcome something like dyslexia and put up a good academic career. So, Theo in the first episode of The Cosby Show, of course, I know The Cosby Show is a big bit thing of contention with everyone. But the fact of the matter is that in 1984, when the show started, in September 1984, that is, it was big because not many networks would bring in a comedy show involving a black family with a wealthy black family at that. Usually, sometimes the black family might be portrayed as the poor ones, like, struggling and then suffering the good times, like, good times. But the fact is, the Cosby Show made everyone know that there were shows that portrayed affluent black families, if you will. It's like blackish. But anyway, Theo and Cosby and of course Cliff have a talk and all that. But Theo thinks that he can get through life easily and all that with his grades being so badly. But Cliff basically, aka Bill Cosby, basically tells him, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of this world. So they have a long talk about their futures and all that. And Field seems to be a little carefree, but then he starts to push and push and push, and he would volunteer at um, community centers. He would be like going to New York University for college, even though a lot of people thought he wasn't going to be good enough because he was found to be dyslexic. I can't remember what season, was it 3 or 4, when they find out that Theo was dyslexic and all that, and that explains why academically he's not the best tool in the shed. Like Cliff, having Sandra, Rudy, Vanessa, and Denise having to deal with it. His only son, and then have dyslexia. I know that Cliff and Claire kind of get on everyone's nerves because of how they dismissed Phil's dyslexia. But once they found out about it, they did all they could to help Phil along because that's what good parents do. Like they realize their mistakes and then try to replicate for them, reciprocate, whatever you want to call it. But of course, Phil becomes much respected and all that. Goes to New York University for teaching, and that was the premise of the final episode of the Cosby Show ever in 1992. Was Phil's graduation from university and all that, and Cliff reminiscing about his son and all that. Of course, the Degrassi side of things is, yeah, you have a great show in the 1980s for Degrassi, and it lasted like 5 seasons, 3 for junior high, 2 for high, and then had that School's Out movie in January 1992. But the fact of the matter is that there was another black person with a learning disability. Her name was Liberty. Liberty was a go-getter and all that. And then in the middle, was it the middle or the just close to the end of season 1 when Liberty is comforted by Coach Armstrong, by Mr. Armstrong. And Emma isn't sure what to do about it and then tells Manny, and Manny says, I think it's just nothing. And Emma's like, okay, fair. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, Terry, one of Paige's henchwomen, if you will, overhears it, spreads the rumor, and basically everyone blames Emma for spreading the rumor, even though that it was not Emma's rumor, it was Terry who overheard things. It's kind of ironic because you know how Emma is perceived. Then the fact of the matter is that Emma tries to do damage control. She confesses to Raj about the rumor, even though it wasn't completely her fault. Liberty then tells Emma, "You could have ruined a man's career." And Emma, I feel like, almost told Liberty that she felt uncomfortable about Liberty being with Coach Armstrong because of the fact that in the hotel in the series premiere that she almost was taken advantage of by an older man. So what ends up happening is that Emma was just concerned about Liberty, but she took it the wrong way. I mean, it does play into Emma's problems in season one with affection and all that. Because, she went to the hotel to try to find Jordan, and then there was a middle aged man who catfished her. And this was catfishing before catfishing was in the social lexicon. And she didn't know how to approach it. And maybe that's why she was uncomfortable with Manny joining the Spirit Squad, being a cheerleader, because people perceive cheerleaders as bimbos. That's understandable. I can understand Emma's POV, but she went a little overboard. Okay, Manny called her out on it, rightfully so. So what ends up happening is that we find out that Liberty has dyscalculia, and Emma says, "But you're so smart." Liberty says, "Yeah, but I have troubles with numbers and math and all that." Math isn't all about numbers. It's about the cosine, the tangent, and all that geometry stuff. But the fact of the matter is that Liberty struggles with it and all that. They actually do reference it later on in Degrassi. In season 4, in the episode in which Emma gets in trouble for trying to destroy Chris and Liberty because it would make her look bad, which I don't think it would. I mean, why would it look bad? Um, Manny notices that Liberty's head is in the clouds, and then Emma whispers, "It's probably her dyscalculia. She's probably just not getting it." And then that's when Manny inadvertently gets Emma to realize that Liberty has a thing for Chris now that, Chris and Emma have broken up. And then Emma doesn't want Liberty with Chris because it would do damage to her. And I'm like, well, we all are like, well, that's very egotistical and all that. And why would it destroy Emma? Like, people talk bad about Emma's causes behind her back and all that. And she doesn't take it lightly. She doesn't care. Now she cares. But a lot of people said because she had a glow up, her character and the actress, that basically she started getting a little airheaded or above her own station, as the kids say nowadays. It's kind of weird seeing a 40-year-old having to do these terms. But anyway, but speaking of people egotistical stuff, this is how the Hulk Hogan story brings into Degrassi. You're thinking, you're weird. I am weird, but hey. So what ends up happening is, Hulk Hogan died on Thursday. But it has something to do with Emma because Emma is blonde. Um, the main character, like Hulk Hogan was practically the main character in WWE for many years in the 80s and 90s. And Emma was the main character for Degrassi Next Gen before season 7 ended. So anyway, basically, and they were both too big for the britches. Now you will agree that Hulk Hogan is the GOAT of WWE. Without him, I think that WWE would have faltered and WCW would have been huge. But the fact of the matter is that Hulk had the major championship belt for 4 straight years. Lost it to Andre the Giant, controversially, of course. But anyway, yeah, Hulk Hogan was the face of WWE in the 80s and 90s, just like Emma was the face of Next Gen in the 2000s. But you also have a comparison that they're both egomaniacs. That be thinking, well, how's Hulk Hogan an egomaniac? Well, he's perceived to have a lot of backstage politicking. It's not like the politics with Trump. It's backstage politics with how wrestling events happen. A lot of people know wrestling is kind of staged and the results are rigged and all that stuff. But Hogan pretty much uses his stuff to actually get what he deserves in his own words. Like he is kind of responsible for a few things in the 90s that didn't go over so well. In 1990, when Hulk Hogan faced on the Ultimate Warrior in Toronto at WrestleMania 6 and lost to him cleanly, Hulk then presented Ultimate Warrior with the championship belt, raised his hand, and did all that, and Warrior celebrated. But a lot of people actually said that Hulk Hogan was just basically pandering to his own ego because of the fact that he's like, I presented the belt to him. I should be in the spotlight, not Ultimate Warrior. And some people say Hulk politicked WWE that maybe the Ultimate Warrior is not the greatest champion in the world. And Warrior lost to Sergeant Slaughter. Of course, WWE and its patriotism angles. Bleh. So that happened. And then in 93, at WrestleMania 9, when Hulk Hogan and Bruce Beefcake lost the tag belts to Money Inc., like that was supposed to be it for Hogan and all that. Hogan even made a challenge after the tag belt and all that, telling it doesn't matter if it's Bret Hart or that three-letter word that starts with the letter J. I'm gonna beat them. So basically, Hulk was setting something up. Lo and behold, Yokozuna won the belt from Bret Hart using salt in the ice, and Yokozuna won the title. And then, lo and behold, there goes Hulk Hogan coming down to the ring to help Bret Hart out. And then Mr. Fuji, Yokozuna's manager, says, I want to challenge. Yokozuna wants to challenge you for the belt. Hogan beats Yokozuna in 30 seconds thanks to Mr. Fuji throwing salt in the wrong person's eyes. And Hogan walked out of WrestleMania 9 as the WWE champion. And everyone cheered and all that. Not a lot of people cheered, obviously, when Yokozuna was champion WrestleMania 9. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the first time that a heel wrestler won a WWE championship match, like the heel, the bad guy. Yeah, I think that's the first time that's ever happened, but had happened at that time. But the fact is that it was later found out years later that Hogan used his politics, his backstage politics, to make him the WWE champion out of WrestleMania 9 and not Yokozuna. So basically, Hulk used his power, and then he refused to lose the belt to Bret Hart at SummerSlam because that was supposed to be the payoff. Hulk versus Bret at SummerSlam. Bret was going to win, and it's going to be passing the torch. Guess what? Hogan does not do that. Hogan decides to leave the company and refuses to fight Bret Hart. Of course, Hulk has to face uh, Yokozuna at King of the Ring for the belt. Yokozuna won by cheap tactics, and Hogan basically was gone and all that. It must be said that Hogan had some egotistical stuff. And it must be said that Emma probably has some egotistical crap of her own. I mean, when you look at her in the first few seasons, like her biggest downfall is her thinking she has to save the world and all that. Putting a lot of effort into her causes, like somehow talking down to like Liberty, Manny, her own mother, and Snake at times. And Radish. Although, must be said, Radish partially has deserved it. Did deserve it. But the fact of the matter for a lot of people is that, you know, Emma kind of felt like she had to save the world and all that with her causes. And that's kind of her biggest character flaw was she was so far up her own butt, if you will, that she didn't see much around her. Basically, it took a while for her to realize situations and to make situations look pretty impressive. So with Emma, it's got to be the fact that with her crusades and all that, she can, and her topic of the month, if you will, she basically doesn't care about what other people think of her. That's fine in some doses, but when they're trying to calm Emma down and try to reason with Emma, she starts getting a little angry and all that. She gets more confrontational when someone tries to point out her flaws than anything else. Yeah, she basically gets herself into a lot of situations, especially her friendship with Manny, which took a dark turn in season 3 when they broke off after Manny and Craig went back to Emma's house to have sex on Emma's bed. Whereas, Emma was at the rave trying to decide if she would try to ruin Chris and Miranda's relationship, which she fails to. She decides not to. And, and Manny calls her out on it. And then Emma and Manny break up as friends. And then they start being friends again once Manny gets pregnant and wants to have an abortion by Craig. But Craig is not too happy with it. Emma agrees with Craig, but says it's her body, her choice, and she wasn't my best friend. I'd be furious. Be like, she wasn't Manny's best friend. They broke off. But I guess maybe Emma realized her errors. And then, Emma's ego in season 4 was terrible. It caused a lot of things. So, of course, Emma breaks up with Chris, and then Emma isn't sure she wants to stay with Chris and all that. But Manny thinks that way, and Emma says, I don't really want Chris. What? I just, what would happen if Chris dates Liberty? What would people think of me if that happens? And Manny calls her out on it, saying, wow, that's low. That's low. So basically, Chris and Liberty are not a couple, mostly because of Manny telling Liberty Emma's plan, and also Chris kind of not being with Liberty. Chris didn't really want Liberty. Liberty wanted Chris. Liberty blasts Emma, and Emma sheepishly admitted, maybe I was not over Chris as I thought I was. And then Liberty says, well, I think we're over as friends. Liberty. So basically, Liberty and Manny stay away from Emma and all that. Although Manny says she wants to invite Emma to Liberty's hot tub. But Liberty basically says no way, she's backstabbing, and Manny listens to her. And basically, Emma realizes she doesn't have her friends. So Emma decides to make friends with Paige's clique to try to destroy Rick and get him out of Degrassi. I mean, Raj really dropped the ball there. I know it was off school grounds and he didn't have any criminal charges, but Raj still had jurisdiction to not let Rick back into Degrassi, didn't he? I think he did. And he just balked at it. But the fact of the matter is that, Emma then decides to team up with Paige to try to get Rick out using a orange ribbon campaign for victims of domestic violence. Unfortunately, Emma's plan fails miserably, and it's an all-out war as people beat up Rick for hurting Terry. Fair, but they're not going to relent and all that. Emma soon realizes after receiving a $500 check from Rick about the whole cause and all that, she kind of figured that maybe Rick does deserve a chance. But then Alex picks up the check, and Emma tries to rip into Alex, who basically says she's lived in women's shelters. Unfortunately for Emma, basically, Paige and her crew don't want Emma being anywhere near Rick. Emma trips up Rick to prove her quote unquote loyalty. And then that's when Jay and Spinner try to beat up Rick, thinking that he's going to go after Emma. Emma stops the beating and basically gets ostracized at school. But of course, within that episode is when she finds Manny and Liberty in the bathroom and then basically says, I'm going to sip on a green tea with Paige. Enjoy your hot tub. Basically, kind of an egotistical move. Practically telling Manny and Liberty that I don't need you two. I got Paige as friends. Unfortunately, that fails miserably. Paige had to have said something to the school to destroy Emma, and then basically Emma is an outcast. And unfortunately, Rick has easy access to her. Well, the quiz bowl team obviously helped out too. But yeah, Emma's ego somehow led to her losing Manny and Liberty as friends, going after Paige's clique, even though that she has badmouthed Paige and her clique, to get rid of Rick and to practically make friends. And of course, low key try to destroy Radish because Radish said that her causes are stupid. But nevertheless, it got the whole thing, and then Emma realizes it, decides to do a 180, and then gets possibly ostracized by the school because not too many people want to hang out with her. Only the Quiz Bowl team, in a sense, and Heather Sinclair. So Emma then starts to have that bad phase and all that. Emma kind of was egotistical, I think, in season 5 of the whole Manny situation because she helped Manny out by allowing Manny to move in after her parents kick her out. But to me, I think Emma kind of was egotistical, thinking that now she got control over Manny, and if Manny does not do what she says, she can kick Manny to the curb. I think Emma felt like she had control over Manny, which is kind of dumb, but I think that's what happened too. And her own ego got in her own way because, trying to chase a boyfriend to try to be normal like everyone else failed miserably. Damien was not a good idea, and Kelly was terrible too. And then she married Spinner. All right, so that's two. Now let's talk about the third thing I'm going to talk about, and that's the Ozzy Osbourne thing. Ozzy Osbourne died on Tuesday. Did he have an impact on Degrassi? Not particularly, but one of his songs was actually a Degrassi title because Degrassi decided by the start of season 1 to have song titles as their actual titles. Like, Time Stands Still was a song, Jagged Little Pill was the name of a song, and that was just Degrassi title. Accidents Will Happen, all that stuff. I'm like, okay, well, Ozzy Osbourne didn't have an impact on Degrassi. But then when I read his Wikipedia page and then listened to his song Bark at the Moon, I'm like, Bark at the Moon was Ozzy Osbourne? I knew that episode existed. Actually, that was supposed to be the premise for this episode, was basically, I want to talk about Bark at the Moon. I know you don't. But, I decided to change course. So Bark at the Moon is, in my mind, one of the greatest episodes that had not one, not two, but three plot lines. Plotline number 1 was Paige's inappropriate relationship with Matt, aka Mr. Olander. Paige and Spinner were kind of on the outs and all that. Spinner decides to go after Manny instead of Paige, even though Paige is working at the movie theater to pay Spinner the money needed for his car and all that. So anyway, Spinner lusts after Manny, but that's not the first plot line. The first plot line is Paige and Olander. Paige goes to yoga and is enjoying her teacher, Matt Olander. Little does she know that Olander is now is a student teacher at the school, and basically, he's going through teachers college and is teaching at Degrassi to see what he could do. He's the one who kind of got mad at Chris for laughing at Emma being, with Jay in the ravine. I'll leave it at that. The fact of the matter for Emma and Jay and all that is just doesn't make sense. So anyhow, Paige still wants to be with Olander, even though that he's a teacher and it's kind of an inappropriate student-teacher relationship. So Paige decides to take Olander to the school dance and all that, trying to get closer to Matt. Of course, Paige and Olander are a bad pairing, and then Simpson steps in and tells Paige to get to class, saying that Hazel can't be blabbing all the time. So anyway, yeah, so she gets closer to Olander. Of course, the ending is that Paige and Matt have to keep things secret, but Snake sees them at the park, and Paige, for some reason, tries to defend Olander. Well, Olander basically told everyone that Paige was the crazy one in this situation, and everyone thought that Paige was problematic. And Paige actually wanted to get out of the media program to get away from Snake, or practically to move schools, but she would have had to flunk because it's too far out of the school year. And Snake was trying to defend Paige. Like, I think he was trying to defend Paige and saying that Olander was the troublemaker the whole time. Olander finally decided to speak out and tell the truth that Paige had nothing to do with this. He was the cause of this. And then he, of course, gets fired. Plotline number 2 was Spinner and Manny. With Paige now working to deal with Spinner's car damage because, she used the car Spinner's car to ram into Dean's car to get revenge for him getting away with raping her. All of a sudden, you got yourself the fact that Spinner has eyes for Manny. Well, Manny lost Craig, and JT was too immature for her. So, for some strange reason, Manny falls in love with Spinner, and then Manny wants to be with Spinner. And then she realizes that maybe the relationship won't work because it's her instead of Spinner. But Spinner tells Manny that, everything is cool and all that. Of course, Spinner is being with Manny and then keeping his problems into the back of his head, to the back of his head because of the whole Rick situation and putting Jimmy in the wheelchair inadvertently. Spinner and Manny stay a couple at the end of the episode. I thought they broke up in this episode, but no, I'm wrong. And then Spinner and Manny break up because the school knows about Spinner inadvertently putting Jimmy in that chair. Because Spinner finally decided after 3 months to tell Jimmy that he and Jay were trying to get Rick off the scent. And then all of a sudden, Rick did have a gun, which those two didn't know, and shot Jimmy in the spine and all that. It must be said that I wish Jimmy had zigzagged or basically not running a straight line, and then Rick probably would have missed. And let's not forget, Rick was actually closing his eyes and turning his head when he shot Jimmy. If he wanted to kill Jimmy, he would have went for the head right off the bat. But let it be said that Spinner got what he deserved, and basically the whole school found out about this. And then Spinner finally decides to talk to Hatzalakos and alleviate his guilt. Although it must be said that I think Hatzalakos was going to talk to Spinner and probably gave him a few days to, confess, or else she would have to come in play. And plotline number 3, and I know you're going to hate this, is basically the end of an era for a Degrassi character. So, of course, Spinner is talking to Manny and all that. Paige is with Olander. And then all of a sudden, Marco and Paige were supposed to go see Principal Radich, but it ended up being Marco and Manny. And then they see Radich with a box of stuff and telling them, I assume you're looking for the principal, but I'm not who you seek. Is that a riddle, sir? No. It means that I have been reassigned, and basically takes the box of stuff and leaves in a huff. And then guess who's the new principal? Hatzalakos. Surprise. So basically, she says that the school board's done their job to try to help us out. Now it's our turn to help everyone else. Of course, Marco was brought in because he's the student council president, and Paige was brought in because she was the leader of the cheer squad. Of course, Paige, with her lust for Olander, leaving things up to Manny now. So basically, they come up with ideas and all that, and Hasanako says we need to move on in a proper format. But that's not the end of Radich. After the first commercial break and all that, in which, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Manny actually is being lusted after by Chester, who lusts after Emma and a few other girls. So basically, Chester was just 3 or 4 episodes of dead air, if you will. But after that, Manny and everyone watches as Raj gives a farewell speech saying that all good things must come to an end. Marco does present him with a gift and all that to thank him for his time at Degrassi. Of course, there's mixed emotions because of the whole Raj handling the school, like during the Rick situation and the aftermath. I hate to say this, but I know you're going to hate me saying this, but I feel that Raj was given one more shot to fix the situation after time stands still, but all he could think about was being a little egotistical and all that. It's possible that because, yes, Degrassi is on the 6 o'clock news for all the wrong reasons, but Raj played it off incorrectly. Did he find any answers to do with the Rick situation of the pain and feathers? No. Was there any reason to think that Raj was fixing the situation? No, because voices carrying the subplot, we learned that Raj is not taking things right. And basically Liberty and JT right saw mocking him and he throws him into detention. Kind of his MO is that he can't take a joke, or basically he thinks everyone's attacking him. Raj deserved what he got. I mean, he probably was reassigned, but more than likely, he probably didn't like the reassignment and decided to, leave because he just couldn't handle it. Say what you want, but at least they gave Radic a send off. Not the best send off in the world, but they gave him a send off. They like, you have characters like Kendra, Lucas, even Darcy, and all that. They blackholed those people. Like basically, they didn't get their happy endings. Radic at least got an ending. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending nevertheless. And of course, behind the scenes, Dan Woods, who played Radic, didn't want to fly back from LA to Toronto every time to shoot Degrassi scenes because he was producer of Chop Cut Rebuild and it was actually doing well. He said that if Chop Cut Rebuild was not working so well, he was going to go back to Degrassi full time or something like that, or write a Degrassi episode or two. But that was the end of Radic. And however you take it, Radic was a decent character and all that. But like I said, Bark at the Moon had those three storylines: Pedro Volander, Manny, and Spinner, and Radic being turfed for the last time. There's no mention or like him coming back to the show. And a lot of people, I think, would probably say, why was Snake not principal? But I think Hatzlackos had the training to be principal. But more than not, and this is my opinion, is that Snake probably was given a golden chance to be principal, but he said he screwed everything up and he probably felt guilty for the Rick situation happening in the first place and basically couldn't go through with it. But, like Snake kind of did the right thing. Like Snake wanted Radic to take accountability for his actions and he didn't. Kind of stupid, don't you think? But there it goes. And that's the story of how celebrity deaths and threes actually do impact Degrassi. You have Phil, aka Malcolm Jamal Warner, who died, and Theo Huxtable being a black character with dyslexia, and Liberty almost being the same thing, except it was dyscalculia. Plot line number two is, of course, Ozzy Osbourne with his song "Bark at the Moon," which was a Degrassi episode, which was prominent because it brought Manny and Spinner's relationship into the picture, as long as Paige and Olander before everyone found out about them, and also Radic being given a send off. And number three is the Hulk Hogan death and how he's compared to Emma because Emma was blonde and basically sticking her nose into other people's business and probably doing some backstage politics, probably politicking herself, thinking that she was above her own station. And she was, unfortunately. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.